Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, eternal, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. Today I am speaking with a friend. Not just a personal friend, but a very strong and close friend to the Jewish people in the Jewish state of Israel, Colonel Richard Kemp. Shalom, shalom, Colonel Kemp.
Shalom, it's a great pleasure to be with you.
It is always a pleasure being able to be in your company, and I saw you at the recent JNS Policy Summit in Jerusalem. Last interviewed you at the conference in Washington, D.C. around a year ago, right, in the middle of the war then, and getting your input on how things were progressing in the war. And here we are today, 19 months into this war where we're fighting on 7 fronts. And I don't think anyone better to be able to get insight for where we stand, how things are going, than experienced military man like yourself for this 7-front war. So I guess let's start with this. This morning, Israel was attacked, and unfortunately one missile landed successfully right in the vicinity of Ben Gurion Airport, which is a huge, huge strategic win for them. If it would have been whatever, hundreds of meters or whatever, it could have done tremendous damage to Israel. So thankfully, miraculously, it was only in an open field outside of the airport, nowhere closer. But it shows you that, again, 19 months in, and this was the Houthis, the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen who shot, even with the United States doing what it is doing, the Houthis are still successfully launching missiles at us. Yesterday morning, Shabbat morning, we also had to run to our safe rooms, bomb shelters. And here again today, 2 days in a row. So what is your thoughts about where things stand right now regarding the Houthis? Is what is America doing enough? Not enough? Should Israel be involved as well and not just outsource this to the United States military actions? What do you think?
Well, I think President Trump's more intensive campaign against the Houthis is the right thing to do. Maybe they can do more, maybe they should do more, and if they can do more, they should do. But I think in retaliation and response to what happened today at Ben Gurion Airport, Israel certainly needs to launch a blistering attack against the Houthis. And I would hope they will. But that's not the end of the story, of course. I mean, I hope the American intensive campaign continues against the Houthis until they've been basically prevented from carrying out the kind of offensive action they've been carrying out. But of course, that leads us to something even more important, which is striking Iran.
Right.
And of course, the Houthis are a proxy of Iran. They're funded by Iran, they're armed by Iran, they get some direction from Iran. Without Iran, the Houthis would be nothing, or almost nothing. Certainly, they might have a significant influence in Yemen, but they would not have the kind of capability to have more widely, such as today's ballistic missile attack. So Iran has got to be dealt with. And President Trump is doing that now through negotiations. I'm not optimistic personally that negotiations are going to get anywhere. And if there is an agreement, it's not going to be a good agreement. There's no doubt about that. I think the only way of dealing with a jihadist regime like Iran is by military force. And therefore, I think that's got to happen, and only by attacking Iran's nuclear capabilities, but also indirectly that will be an attack on many of Iran's proxies, because it will weaken Iran's link with the proxies.
Right, and I wanted to go a little deeper into that question, into that issue, because even if how these talks are going, from what we're being told, is basically just dealing with the Iranian nuclear capabilities, stopping them from ever being able to enrich uranium. That's what it sounds like. Meaning that doesn't even, supposedly, it's not even dealing with their missile capabilities or support of proxies around the region. It's focused on just the enriching of uranium, which makes me think, wait a second, so even if a deal is signed, and I don't think it's going to happen either, but we'll go into that in a second, and it's a good enough deal that Trump signs, which again, I doubt, but it doesn't deal with the support for Houthis to not be able to continue. So that's like a fear that I'm walking into the situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that none of us know really what's going on behind the closed doors of these negotiations, but they certainly should include one, a curtailment of Iran's ballistic missile and drone capability. And let's not forget, Iran's not just attacking in this region. Iran is indirectly attacking one of America's allies, Ukraine, by supplying Russia with drones as well. So it's the whole issue of Iran's ability to manufacture and potentially use long-range attack systems, whether it's missiles or drones or anything else. That has to be dealt with.
Right.
It has to be dealt with. And again, as you pointed out, Iran's proxy network, of course, they've been badly damaged. Hamas is on its back now. Hezbollah is not quite on its back, but it's certainly a shadow of its former self. The same applies to the jihadists, again, operating against Israel from Syria. These elements, so far anyway, the future of Syria is a different story, but these elements have been badly undermined by Israel in the last 19 months. But that's not enough. They've got, Iran's ability to fund and direct and arm these different elements has to be dealt with. And I don't think that's, as I said before, I don't think that's something that can be done with by a signature on a bit of paper.
Right, yeah, that's the biggest fear. And since you went down in the direction of the proxies, I want to ask you, leaving the Middle East for a second, because I think this is important for people not in the Middle East to understand how they are also endangered by the Iranian axis of evil. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Iran is deeply entrenched in South America. Militarily, capabilities, I don't know if nuclear or not nuclear, but definitely missile technologies and stuff like that. So America is not just threatened because of what and American citizens from Iran, because of what Iran's doing in the Middle East, which are their allies, but it's not being talked enough about the direct danger Iran has on America's southern border from South America. And the only way to deal and stop with that is totally, in a sense, getting rid of all military capabilities and ballistic missiles and its whole axis of evil around the world by tackling it now and not via a deal. Love if you to be able to go into more detail in that.
Yeah, Iran has proxies around the world, as you mentioned, in south of America's southern border, inside America itself as well, of course. Iran has capabilities.
Sleeper cells.
Absolutely. And the same goes for many different countries around the world. Today, it was announced in the UK that there have been a number of Iranians arrested who were planning a terrorist attack in the UK. They've been arrested. The target of that attack hasn't yet been made public, but it's not the first time. Iran attempted to set up a explosive factory in London to carry out a major attack in London a few years back. They've done many other things along those lines. So the Iranians are not just directed against Israel or Arab countries, they're directed against the Western world. And of course, let's not forget that one of the cries is of the Iranian regime, death to Israel, death to America.
Right.
They don't like Britain very much either.
Right.
So, I think it kind of illustrates the reality that this war is not just a war that Israel's fighting against jihadists. It's a war the world has to fight, and the world is more reluctant to do so because political leaders, they very often don't see the immediate threat. And for example, in the UK, as I mentioned, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that kind of behind most of these jihadist proxy groups, they've been planning attacks against the UK. They've got a presence in the UK, sleeper cells. What's the UK done about it? Okay, well, the important thing is to make arrests, etc., as for example today. But they haven't prescribed the IRGC. They haven't designated it as a terrorist organisation when it's been carrying out at least terrorist plans against the UK for a long time. So, this is a big failure, and it kind of, I think, illustrates the reluctance of Western governments, particularly in Europe, I would say.
Right.
Now in the US we've got a different picture, but in Western Europe, Western governments to understand the threat is not just against Israel and the Arab world, it's against our own countries.
Right, and hence why I know you say also, this battle is Israel fighting on the front line for the whole freedom-loving world. It's not just our fight. But not everyone understands that, and definitely not assisting us, and also piling on upon us instead of supporting us.
Well, again, in Britain,
yeah,
there is currently a partial arms embargo against Israel. Still.
Wow.
And that is shameful for Great Britain. It's not because, you know, even the arms that are being, or it's actually components of weapons that Britain has helped Israel with in the past. It's not that you know, the only reason to impose an arms embargo if Israel is doing something illegal, and the British government knows it's not. It knows it's not, because the British government, we have military attaches over here, we have an intelligence organisation, we know what the Israelis are doing, as far as we're able to.
Right.
But the facts are not what matters to our politicians.
Right.
What matters to our politicians is the domestic political impact. And by criticising Israel, wrongly criticising Israel, for example, our Prime Minister, when something happens in Israel, I've spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I've impressed on him the need to minimise civilian casualties. He knows that the Israelis are minimising civilian casualties. He's saying this for his domestic audience, but it's dangerous, because by saying that, he's also giving fuel to those who are targeting Jews in Britain, and that's grossly irresponsible in my view.
Right.
But as I say, the facts don't matter. It's his political calculations for his own electorate.
Right. So now I want to go back to the Iran deal and ask you about this, because there are, in general, two divergent analyses of Trump's talks with the Iranian regime right now. One is that he's going to sign a bad deal. He does not want war. All of the troops and ships he's sending out to the Middle East is basically to flex muscles, part of the art of the deal, in order to get the Islamic regime of Iran to buckle and agree to a deal. But in the end, it might not be as bad of a deal that Obama did, but it won't be a good deal, because anyone who understands the Islamic regime of Iran, they know they are chess players. They know they are brilliant negotiators. They're willing to give up almost everything, but to ensure they have the loophole to continue their program. And whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, they will outlive a Trump administration to be able to do the damage to the world with the nuclear capability. So that's one analysis, which is very fearful about the Trump's talks with Iran right now. Then there's the other analysis that says, you know what? He's doing this as part of the art of the deal in order to expose them, and in the end of the day, they're not going to agree to the minimum of the no enrichment of uranium whatsoever. And at the end of the day, we will have a military campaign, because that's the only thing that's going to stop the enrichment of uranium by the Iranian regime. Insight.
I think whatever the outcome of these talks are, doesn't really make much difference. Whether Iran rejects a deal or whether Iran accepts some kind of deal, doesn't matter, because whatever the regime signs or agrees to, you can forget about it. You know, they're not going to. They don't feel in the same way as we do necessarily obliged to stick to a deal or a treaty that we make. They don't care about that. So if there's the best deal possible on paper, forget about it. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. The only outcome I see possible, short of military action against Iran, that would be acceptable, would be the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear capability and its ballistic missile systems and drones, etc. Dismantling of that, and I don't mean agree to dismantle, but I mean actual dismantling of it, with outside verifiable confirmation that that's exactly what's happening.
And I imagine Marco Rubio approved assessors and at United Nations assessors.
Yeah. So that's the only option in my opinion. I can't see them going along with that. I can't see it. All I can see is, in terms of actually confronting the problem, is military action. I was in the army British Army for 30 years. I know what war is like. It's a horrible, hateful thing, and you know, any measure possible to prevent it should be certainly looked at and, if possible, done. But you know, you've got to consider, okay, there's going to be a lot of violence and destruction, and potentially including retaliation against Israel and US forces in the region as well, and Arab countries in the region. That could all happen, and it's all going to be very, very painful. But you've got to ask yourself, what is the worst? Is that the worst thing, or is Iran having a nuclear capability the worst thing you could have. And I would say that is the case, that the world cannot really afford to allow a regime like Iran to be in control of nuclear weapons.
100%. I think that's the most powerful and most important thing that needs to be said over and over again for people to internalize and understand that.
Right.
And this isn't a can that could be kicked down the road. Because
Yeah.
the second they have nuclear capabilities, that's it. The whole world is in trouble, and they're much more dangerous than a little North Korea with
Absolutely.
nuclear weapons.
And I think even more dangerous than Russia, because, okay, Russia's got very significant nuclear arsenal. Iran will have a much smaller nuclear arsenal. But I think, notwithstanding what Putin's been doing in Ukraine, etc., Putin is a rational thinker. He thinks maybe not quite the same as the West, but he's a rational thinker. And China is as well, I believe. But Iran is not.
For 1,400 religious ideology of taking over the world is not a rational thinking.
Right.
They're a long-term eternity strategic thinking. All right, let's move on from Iran. I'm wonderful having the opportunity. We could take the whole Middle East just today in a few hours. That's it. All right, you guys are in for a treat. So let's move on to Gaza for a second. Gaza has been on a low flame because Netanyahu has led this government to try to put minimum military pressure to try to get out maximum amount of hostages out, which again, big debate in Israel if that's the right thing to do, because while 59 hostages, dead and alive, or alive and some dead, are important to get back home and to safety, we're talking about the lives of 10 million Israelis that have to be protected. So there's that balance, how much needs to be done to end this war as quickly as possible to provide safety for 10 million Israelis and no longer have to fight a war, no longer have to be called up for reserve duty and get back to a normal life, versus no, we have to do this slowly while we're still at war and elongating war, and the left uses everything against us. Always. The fact that the hostages are not yet saved yet, oh, it's Netanyahu's fault. The fact that we're still at war, it's not over yet, oh, it's Netanyahu's fault. Like, totally misunderstanding that. I don't think, and you tell me, if there's ever been any other government or any other country that's allowed a war to go on for as long as our war is going on because they're putting so much emphasis on trying to save as many hostages as possible. But putting that aside, and you can add your input afterwards, the decision has been made that they're going to take the next step, and with more pressure militarily in Gaza. My son, who's been up in the Lebanon border, he's now being sent down into Gaza. My other son, who's in reserves, he's now been called up for his 4th reserve duty. He's a combat engineer. They did a lot of work down in Gaza, did a lot of work up in Lebanon. They're now being called next week to go back into Gaza. Tens of thousands, I think it's 60,000 soldiers, reserve soldiers, are being called up. But again, the argument in Israel is, wait a second, no. If you're calling us up, let's do it to end it. We don't want to be called up again. And then there's the hostage issue. So we're not calling up the hundreds of thousands to end it. We're just raising the level of pressure, not even maximum, but more pressure. Love to hear your insight on how you think things are developing, and obviously understanding this complex war situation that I don't think has ever been to this level on any other war in modern history.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is that I have the utmost admiration for your sons and their fellow soldiers who have been fighting in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and other places. That I've witnessed some of their operations firsthand in different places, and including inside Gaza. And I have the greatest admiration and respect for what they've been doing, and particularly given that it's not only incredibly dangerous for them, so of course it's cost too many lives already, but also the fact that they are so dedicated to fighting for their family, their friends, their country, even after this huge length of time that the war's been going, in Israel's longest war, I believe, if I'm right in saying. So that having been said, it is essential that the war is ended as quickly as possible, using the maximum possible force. And I don't believe, I mean, all right, I'm not making these decisions or anywhere near the decision makers at the moment. They've got the toughest possible job. People like Netanyahu, the chief of staff of the IDF, defense minister, they've got a very, very tough job. But I don't believe from the information I have that you're going to get the hostages out with a soft touch, with anything other than the maximum extreme force against Hamas. So they realise, and maybe they're beginning to realise already, that there is no future for them. They're finished. They're going to die. And I think maybe strong military pressure against Hamas could see some hostages being released or being freed by the IDF. But I have my doubts as to whether, if there's any kind of ceasefire, any further ceasefire, or any lighter touch against them, that's going to result in the release of all the hostages. And the balance has got to be drawn. You know, it's a really tough balance. Particularly, I mean, you know, however many hostages remain alive in Gaza, it's really important to get them out. But also, there are two other things that are also very, very important. One is the overall security of the state of Israel, and the other is the lives of Israeli soldiers who are fighting there. We shouldn't, you know, no Israeli, right, and no Israeli soldier's life is worth less than anyone else's life.
If I can interject, because this is actually an issue that just came up last week. It was reported on. There's an argument between the head of Southern Command of the IDF, who is in charge of the war efforts in Gaza, and the head of the Air Force. Because the head of Southern Command has been telling the Air Force, bomb here, because we have soldiers there that need protection. And the head of the Air Force says, no, I'm not going to bomb there because it's too close in proximity to potentially an area where there are hostages, and I don't want what we're doing to lose a life of hostage. And the head of the Southern Command goes, we're going to lose the lives of so many soldiers if you do not provide the air cover. And this is an actual argument taking place, I don't know whether on a daily level, an hour level, but this is what we're dealing with.
And this is actually not unique to Israel. I mean, in Afghanistan, for example, there were cases where a ground commander wanted air support and was denied it because of the proximity, to protect his troops, denied it because of the proximity of civilians. So it's not a unique problem here in Israel. I can't, you know, on the cases you've mentioned, I can't kind of second guess any of these commanders. They have to. There are a number of factors. One factor is that they have to do what they can to protect the lives of the hostages. Another factor is they have to do what they can to protect the lives of innocent civilians in Gaza, depending on your definition of innocent civilians. And the third factor, which is, and it's not third and last, it's just as important as the others, is protecting the lives of IDF soldiers on the ground. So all of these things have to be considered and a decision made, and it's very often extremely tough decisions. I've been in a position myself where I've made that sort of decision, and it's not an easy one to make, and sometimes you get it wrong. But I certainly think, I certainly think that, as I said earlier, the lives of Israeli soldiers are worth no less than the lives of anybody else in Gaza.
All right. So overall, in terms of how would you say things are? Oh, I'll take a step back. When we spoke a year ago last, and I raised the issues of how there was a lot of distrust with the senior command of the IDF and intelligence of how they were running the war and not really running the war, not listening to the commands from the government to do what was necessary in order to fight and destroy Hamas. And that was a discussion we had then. Since then, the head of the IDF has been changed. And I know, and you were basically agreeing with me at the time. We had a whole conversation about it. We have a new IDF chief of staff. Are those worries still in your head as well? Or do you think like we have a new, different type of leadership in the IDF, not dealing with the same problems we were dealing with a year ago?
Again, I can't really second guess what goes on behind closed doors between the Prime Minister, the Defence Minister, and the Chief of Staff. All I know is that the professionals in this game are the IDF, the Chief of Staff and his staff, etc. And they have a responsibility when decisions are taken to forcefully express their decisions. But of course, the political dimension may see things from a different perspective, and there will be clashes. For example, in the Second World War, General Alan, who was the British Chief of Staff, and Winston Churchill had frequent, sometimes very, very bad clashes about military strategy and policy, etc. So it's not unusual, but the important thing, and this happened between Alan and Churchill, is that you can have a shouting match between the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff, and the Chief of Staff puts forward his perspective, even if it's contrary to what the Prime Minister thinks, and should be. He should put it forward, even if it is. But ultimately, the Chief of Staff has to turn to the right and say, yes, sir, and go and do what the political decision is, because the army works for the government. It's not the other way around.
Right.
So I think that, I don't know whether that happens now or what happened before, but that's, I think, a fundamentally important feature of this war. And another feature of this war that's important, I think, is that very often people are criticised outside Israel, British government, American government, other governments for, and I myself criticise them for when they take actions, and I include in this international organisations like the UN, when they say things, take actions against Israel unjustly, which encourage Hamas and almost incite violence, maybe not intentionally, but they do. The more you unjustly criticise the Israeli military or the Israeli government, the greater strength that gives to Hamas, to Iran, to the Houthis.
Right.
And the same applies to here in Israel. I think one thing that is so important, and you see many times when it doesn't happen, is fine, everyone's got to have their own point of view, but ultimately people, I think, political activists particularly, should bear in mind that when they attack the Israeli government openly during a war of this intensity, they are encouraging the enemy. I'm not saying there shouldn't be the normal democratic processes, but it's really important that people bear that in mind. And when there are disputes between the Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister, then those should certainly not be out in the open.
Right. All right, now let's go on to Syria. I was actually in Washington, D.C. for a few trips the past few months, and one of the things that I was explaining to the congressmen and senators and their staff when I was talking to them was like, folks, what we're witnessing in Syria is the death to Sykes-Picot. There is no more Sykes-Picot, right? For those who don't understand, Sykes-Picot was the international agreement after World War I that divided up the Middle East into different nation states in an area of tribes and religious differences, and it was artificial boundaries that was created. That was basically England took this and France took that, right? Syria was one of those states which right now, because a Turkish-backed ISIS Taliban terror group has basically taken over the country, and they're massacring the Alawites, and they're massacring the Christians, and they're massacring the Kurds, and now they're out to massacre the Druze. The country's basically broken up. There's no more Syria anymore. And Israel is in a unique position because we have to protect our northern border from what's going on there, from whether the Sunni or Shia jihadists who are active there, who are a danger to us. I mean, Jolani himself, if not mistaken, said a few weeks ago that after we take care of Syria, our next stop is Jerusalem. So they're clear about wanting to, whatever massacre they're doing to non-Sunni Muslims in Syria, they want to do to all the Jews. But in addition, we have the component of the Israeli Jews population. The Jews are separated. There's a population on the Golan Heights in Israel, and their brothers, sisters, cousins live in Syria. And they're fighting a war right now, trying to prevent a greater massacre of their own population. And the question is, what should Israel do? So I know what I think Israel should do, and I'll add in a second, but I'd love to hear what you think in this situation.
I think, the first thing I'd say is that there is a long-term threat from Syria against Israel. And Israel has, to quite a significant extent, has reduced that threat by its incredible operations against the Syrian military hardware that it carried out as soon as Assad fell. But that threat will continue and develop, both by the Al-Qaeda Islamic State entity that is now running Syria. They may have the guy Jolani may have a collar and tie on, but he's no less a jihadist for that. So he's a big threat to Israel. And the guy behind him, Erdogan, in Turkey, is also a threat. He's threatened himself to march on Jerusalem. He's been a strong supporter of Hamas. He's certainly no friend of Israel. And Israel has to guard itself against all of that. And
you're talking about Erdogan in Turkey, in addition to Jolani in Syria.
Yeah, they're kind of together in many ways. And Erdogan has a very clear idea of re-establishing the Ottoman Empire in some form, including in Syria.
Right.
So this is a big immediate and long-term problem. But Israel, I think, has to, in relation to its own defense, the defense of its own people, has to maintain whatever security apparatus it thinks it needs inside Syria, including where it is on the top of Mount Hermon, in perpetuity. You know, the 7th of October showed that you can't kind of see a threat and then, you know, hope it's not going to materialize into what it could become. And that applies also to Syria. As far as protection of the Druze is concerned, every country has a kind of a right to protect when it sees the potential loss of civilian life. Now, the legalities of that between Israel and Syria, I'm not 100% sure of, and you know, a lot of this stuff is done through the United Nations agreements, and that's not going to happen in relation to anything Israel wants to do. But I think Israel should do what it can to help protect the Druze inside Syria. But of course, Israel's also fighting on 6 other fronts at the same time. Right.
Yeah. Now, I think you touched upon Israel's biggest challenge is that we have all these fronts in this one war, and I know that Netanyahu's strategy. I think Netanyahu's strategy is try to deal with one front at a time. There's only so much we could be stressed, especially with one army and to fight all these different countries and terror threats surrounding us. But the message that I believe is correct, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, and I think as a pure military perspective, 1, in order to protect Israel, 2, in order to give the message to our enemies in the Middle East, don't you dare ever think about attacking us again, or else you're going to lose. The only currency that translates into loss in the Middle East is loss of land. And the best way to protect Israel and give that message to our enemies, and the fact that Syria has basically broken apart, and is that it's not civil war, they're being massacred by the jihadists, who are being recognized by the Western world. You know, the heads of the European Union were recognizing this jihadist, this Al-Qaeda ISIS guy, which is insane. American congressmen are going there and meeting them. Oh, maybe we can work with them.
And the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor went and shook his hands.
Really? Yeah. I missed that. Right. They want to put Netanyahu on trial, but they'll shake hands with this guy who's massacring Christians and Jews and allies. Right. Okay. So I believe the solution is no. Israel has to take southern Syria. We have to liberate southern Syria, not just the Hermon, but the whole area, at least up to Damascus, where it's mostly the minorities who are being massacred. And I believe I'm a realist. I like looking at reality. Reality is the minorities in southern Syria, the only force that can protect them to allow them to live safe lives is the Jewish state of Israel. They can't trust the Sunni jihadists. They can't trust the Shia jihadists. The only force in the Middle East who can allow them to have security, to be able to wake up in the morning, not worry about being killed on the streets or in their beds, is the Jewish state of Israel. But Israel shouldn't do it only because it's about protecting them, but we should be taking southern Syria because that's about protecting Israel and neutralizing the threat and giving over the true message of, no, you guys are screwing with us. This is how you win. Don't you dare think of doing this again, or you'll have to pay with more loss of land. But that's how I'm projecting to people about. I don't think Israel will be doing this, at least not today, but it should already be thought of as people of understanding. Oh my God, this is a reality, and that does make sense.
As you say, there are 2 issues. One is the protection of life, even if it's not directly related to the defense of Israel. And Israel, as you know, as one of the world's most moral countries, with ethical responsibilities as well. If it can help save lives in Syria, then it should. But perhaps the strongest argument is for defending Israel itself and whatever it needs to do. I think the 7th of October proved to us that you can't just assume the best case is going to happen. Right. You've got to assume the worst case is going to happen. And if that means Israel has to have permanent military presence in southern Syria, in southern Lebanon, or anywhere else that potentially threatens Israel, then it has to do so. But of course, going back to the point you made before, Israel cannot be everywhere at the same time.
Right. And since you brought up Lebanon, last front we'll deal with today, what is your take on where things stand with Lebanon? Because again, Israel hit Hezbollah hard. They're not able to get all the support as they used to from Iran, because that's the positive development in Syria. Because the Bashar Assad fell and the jihadists took over, but at least that stops Iran from being able to supply directly Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they're weakened, but Lebanon is still a ticking time bomb. And I'll fill you in on this. I had a meeting with a congressman, and he said that he just came back from a visit in Lebanon, and this was the week of Nasrallah's funeral, right? So he went into Beirut thinking, oh, I'm listening to the headline news. Hezbollah's been weakened. They're a nothing. They're a nothing burger in Lebanon anymore. So the talks that the new Trump administration is trying to do and stabilize a new Lebanese government with this prime minister who's Christian or whatever, things are going to be stabilized, and Israel will be able to have a working relationship once again with Lebanon. So this congressman's telling me in the meeting, I was there in my hotel room the day of Nasrallah's funeral. The streets were filled with hundreds of thousands of Shia Muslims out for Nasrallah's funeral. He's like, I saw with my own eyes, Hezbollah is alive and well in southern Lebanon. So I hope he brought that back to his talks on the political level in Washington, or has some influence, because he saw with his own eyes that everything about talks about changing Lebanon and putting it back in its place and weakening Hezbollah, he saw that's a total lie. You might be able to weaken Hezbollah, but the Shia population there is huge and has a tremendous influence in Lebanon, that no matter what changes America or the Western world wants to make in Lebanon, Lebanon's a changed country, and it's just getting worse, and even worse for the Christians, and worse for the Sunni, etc., etc., etc. So where do you think things stand with Lebanon? And because right now Israel's at a ceasefire, where whenever we see things that they're breaking the ceasefire, we attack, but that Lebanon border is still, Hezbollah can come back to the fence now if and they're building up.
I mean, Hezbollah will and is attempting to reconstitute itself after all the damage that Israel did to it, and rightly did to it. I wasn't aware of what you were saying before, but it doesn't surprise me one little bit that Lebanon is still very much in the grip of Hezbollah, and what that means. And Western countries like France stands up, and it kind of has a big influence in Lebanon, Britain as well, and other countries. And what have they done? They've done nothing over the years to try and rebalance this situation, and they're not going to do anything now, to be frank. So again, it comes down to Israel doing what it needs to do. And I believe that, Israel has a number of outposts inside Lebanon now, which is maintaining. I think Israel's going to have to go back in there in much greater force, at least up to the Litani River, possibly beyond that. I think they're going to have to do that. It's the same as with the Syria situation. It's the same with Gaza. Israel's got to have a military footprint in any area that either now or potentially is a threat to Israel. Right. And there's no other solution. The Lebanese government, they undertake to do. They're not going to be able to do anything. Right. They're not going to protect Israel.
Right. And just to give credence to that, not everyone understands this. I'm sure you do. The Lebanese army is supposed to be the army you take over from Hezbollah, right? The Lebanese army is filled with Shia soldiers. So it's a compromised army, and so all the levels of officers as well. So anyone, when the Lebanese government takes over and the Lebanese army takes over, first of all, they haven't yet. Hezbollah is still in charge in most areas. But even if it would take charge, it's still basically a proxy Syrian army, a proxy Hezbollah army in the Lebanese army. Not trustworthy.
No, and we had, the other factor that is in play. We've got a massive United Nations force in Lebanon, massive, and I forget the numbers now, but it's probably bigger than any of your viewers would expect it to be.
Really?
And what have they done? They've done zero. They've watched as Hezbollah has developed its capabilities in southern Lebanon. In many cases, haven't even reported on what's been going on. Never mind taking any action to try and prevent it. So, I go back to what I said before, that you can't trust the Lebanese government. You certainly can't trust the United Nations force in Lebanon. The only thing Israel can trust is Israel's own armed forces to protect the country, and it has to do that on all fronts.
Right. And again, I'm gonna go biblical with you for a second. Again, we've had this rational conversation this whole time, which is great. Going more in the biblical direction as a Jew, very much connected to the Bible, and I imagine you'll appreciate this as well. I explained on my programming that what we're witnessing is basically reality pushing us in the direction that God and the Bible mapped out for the Jewish people. Why? Because basically anyone who reads the Bible sees that God gave biblical borders to the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Well, those biblical borders include parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the 12 tribes, but 2 of the tribes, Asher and Naphtali, their tribal lands are southern Lebanon. So it's like I explain to people, oh my God, through reality, I don't care, you believe in God, you don't believe in God. You believe in reality? Reality is showing us that not only is Israel only protected, but the minorities who live in the areas of southern Syria and southern Lebanon are only protected if the Jewish state of Israel returned to those areas as per actually we were told by God in the Bible thousands of years ago. So you don't want to believe in God? Don't believe in God. Do you believe in reality? Look at what reality is showing us, that we have to be there for our own good, even if you don't want to embrace, oh, that's where the tribes were, or that's where God said we're supposed to be. All right, Greater Israel. No, not Greater Israel because of the Bible. Greater Israel because if we want to provide the best security for the Jewish state and all minorities who want to live in peace with us and around us, well, we must be the ones in charge of those areas, because otherwise we're in a dangerous jungle.
And if you put that aside, and I'm not suggesting we put it aside at all, but on a slightly different tack, the world, not the world, but a large number of people in the world, including in Western countries and including in organizations like the United Nations, just want to undermine Israel. They want to undermine Israel even within its current borders. And I think it's so important, one thing that is so important is that the legal situation is understood, because people don't understand the legal situation. The legal situation is that since 1948, the reconstituted state of Israel has sovereignty over every inch of territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That is the legal situation. It's often denied, and UN resolutions contradict that, but that is the legal reality. And I think it's really important that Israel, the Israeli government, pro-Israel organizations around the world strongly try and counter the anti-Israel feeling, and the people who deny Israel its legal rights push that forward. Now, whether you believe in a two-state solution or you don't believe in a two-state solution doesn't matter. That's a political issue. But the legal issue is those are Israel's borders, right, as they're constituted today and legally constituted. And one of the reasons why so many of these anti-Israel gangs have been so successful in their propaganda campaign against the Jewish state is because that's not understood clearly enough. And you know, Israel stole Arab land. Israel's illegal settlers in Judea and Samaria was in Gaza. And people believe that. And therefore, whatever happens to Israel, the illegal settlers, the apartheid and all the rest of it, you had it coming.
Right.
And what you do in defense of yourself is wrong.
Right.
That's the fundamental basis of all of the effectiveness of this whole anti-Israel campaign. So I do think it's really important that that anyone who supports Israel strongly affirms that as the legal position and contradicts organizations like the UN General Assembly who say otherwise, because
right,
they're wrong.
Right, and I'm a big proponent that every once in a while I'll talk about it, and I've done programs in the past, the San Remo Conference. San Remo Conference, 1920, ratified by then the League of Nations, 1922, which then turned into the United Nations, so therefore was grandfathered into the United Nations. Basically has Israel's Israel's borders for all the land of Israel as approved,
right,
by and authorized by the world powers at the time. And unfortunately that's not talked enough about and given for people to understand. Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you so much. It is a pleasure speaking to you. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I think we touched upon a lot of the issues, if not all of the military issues that we're dealing with here. And I hope you were enriched. If you're not yet following Colonel Kemp and everything he's doing, one of the strongest voices we have there in the world, and definitely in the media, standing up for the truth about Israel and specifically this war, definitely look out for what he's saying and share what he's saying, because it's so important. Not everyone always wants to hear what a Jew has to say because we're compromised, because we're Jewish. But here we have an unbelievable friend who not Jewish and stands up strongly with the truth about Israel. So hopefully that'll make a difference for some of your friends or family who are not willing to listen to the Jewish voices.
Can I say one other thing?
Of course.
To interrupt your flow.
Yes, please.
I believe that it's very easy after 19 months of very intensive fighting in 7 different fronts, as well as in the political warfare front that we've spoken about as well. I believe, and in my mind, there's no question that Israel is going to emerge from this conflict even stronger than it went into it. I've got many reasons for thinking that, but I'm really confident about it. So, you know, I think we're all transfixed by day-to-day happenings on the battlefield and things like Houthis attacks, but I think ultimately Israel is going to emerge far, far stronger, and beyond even that, with enormous Arab alliances in the Middle East, which we've only just seen the beginning of.
I'm so glad you said that. I want to take that and go a step further. All right? So bear with me for another minute before we end this unbelievable episode with Colonel Richard Kemp. I believe that what we're witnessing and experiencing, especially here in Israel, the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel are being pushed to own an identity in the region that we never looked to embrace, which is becoming a regional power. Israel was always looked at as one of the strongest militaries in the Middle East, but obviously not feared enough to deter any of our enemies from wanting to do anything about, to not want to attack us. And they still are not deterred. And what we're experiencing is not just being strong enough to win and be stronger, but to own a new identity for ourselves as a regional power and understand that position is not just waving your finger, oh, I'm strong enough to protect myself, but no, 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 no. We are the regional power. Don't you dare ever think of lifting a pinky against us or against any of our allies in the region, because we are here to stay as a regional power. And I think that is a switch in the mindset of the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel that is really just at the beginning. And I'm definitely at the Pulse of Israel trying to be part of this change in mindset. And in a sense, again, I'm going to go biblical for a second. It's owning who we're supposed to be. Like God said, no, you Jewish people, you're supposed to live here. And yeah, it might be one of the most dangerous regions in the war. But yes, by you living there, you're going to tame the region. You're not necessarily going to change everyone or make them not violent or non-jihadist anymore. But because you own your Jewish identity and you're acting as a strong Jewish tribe, we're a tribal nation also, back in our ancestral homeland, owning that regional power we're supposed to be to make not just the Middle East a better place, but to make the world a better place. And this, I think, is like the transition. It's a civilizational transition that we're in, that not everyone's really hardly anyone's talking about or embracing, but I think that's a greater thing that's going on.
Yeah, and I think that probably above many other things is what the Arab world wants as well. Because the Arab world is, okay, Israel took a knock in its reputation on the 7th of October, but since then it's been fighting so powerfully and effectively on so many different fronts that the Arab world has gained an even greater respect for Israel than it had before. And the Arab world needs Israel's protection. Yes, it's got the United States with its carrier strike groups and B-2 bombers, etc., covering the region. But that's the United States today. Who knows what the United States is going to be like tomorrow? I mean,
100%.
The Arab world lost a great deal of confidence in the United States when Obama was the president, when Biden was the president, and there's going to be something else after Trump is the president.
Right.
So, but there is one potentially, and I say potentially, probably not even potentially, but one strong rock in the Middle East, which all these countries depend on, and will increasingly depend on, that's Israel. And therefore Israel does need to effectively become, or will become, a regional power. And you know, people listening here might say, well, but the Arab, you know, the Saudis, the UAE, etc., other countries are strongly critical of Israel. They are openly, but under the radar, they're not. Most Arab countries are right behind Israel. They want to see Israel destroy Hamas. They want to see Israel take down the regime in Iran and destroy its nuclear program. They want this because it's in their interests of all. They're as much under threat from Iran, or even, potentially even more under threat from Iran and from the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a part, as Israel is.
Right. I think that was worth it to continue this video a few more minutes, this interview. Thanks again, Colonel Kemp. Hope you guys enjoyed, enriched, share. Fabulous information. I'm going to be sharing it everywhere. I hope you will as well. In the meantime, if you're not yet a subscriber to our daily, belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world of the Pulse of Israel, What are you waiting for? Go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. We need your support in order to do our work and get our videos seen, as we are heavily censored across social media. So every once in a while, just click on the donate button on pulseofisrael.com. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.